Thanks for such a glowing introduction. I hope I can live up to the hype.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, Scott, absolutely. Great to see you back in the in our show. Let's talk geopolitics, and I'm going to jump right into it, Scott. I want to get your thoughts as we're looking at this NATO meeting. This is an interesting timeline. Of course, in the United States, the news outlets are reporting that Ukraine has never been stronger. They're feeling very confident. We saw that dialogue exchange where Donald Trump said, "Hey, Zelensky, would you like to go to Moscow, have a meeting?" And he jokingly said, "Hey, there's a lot of drones in Moscow. I probably don't want to go there. It might be too dangerous." But I'd like to get your thoughts on this NATO meeting. We heard a lot of stories, a lot of reports coming from there. Where is NATO right now? Where are we at in this situation, middle of July, as we're looking at this Russia-Ukraine war?
Well, NATO's dead in the water. I mean, there is no NATO. It exists in name only. What was accomplished at this meeting? The fact that people open up a checkbook and write tens of billions of dollars worth of checks to themselves, because this is what we're talking about. If we parse out most of this money, it's not going to Ukraine. It's going to fund, conceptual defense industry projects, down the road. For instance, Donald Trump saying, "I'm going to give you a license to produce Patriots." I can guarantee you not a single Patriot missile will ever be produced in Ukraine. That's an absolute 100% guarantee. Even if the war wasn't happening right now, you couldn't get a production facility up and running, and even just a modest assembly plant inside of 2 years. Of course, there is a war running right now, which means the concept of Ukraine building a 6,000 square meter facility from scratch and having that survive in a wartime when Russia's hunting down such facilities and destroying them on a daily basis is laughable. The NATO meeting was basically all bluster and bluff. What do they have? Nothing. They keep talking about Article 5. Well, I'd like to know what NATO is going to bring to Article 5. If Russia were to, for instance, attack a NATO nation that's currently at war with it, Article 5 doesn't apply. People need to understand that NATO is a defensive alliance. It doesn't give, the NATO charter does not give nations the right to initiate a conflict without the, support of, a NATO, Chapter 4 consultation, for instance, and then cry defense when somebody responds. And yet, when we look at what Germany's doing, when we look at what United Kingdom's doing, we look at what France is doing in Finland and the Baltics, they are active participants in a war against Russia. International law is quite clear on what they're doing and what the consequences could be if Russia, chose to do so, which would be legitimate self-defense under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. But NATO lacks any meaningful military power projection capacity. There's literally no capacity to project power in any meaningful, sustainable fashion into Ukraine today. So all this talk about NATO doing this, NATO doing that, what did we learn about NATO? We learned that NATO will stand by while the United States openly says that they're going to take over Greenland and do nothing. That's some defensive alliance there. Russia isn't attacking NATO, but the United States is talking about physically taking control of territory belonging to a sovereign state, a member of NATO, and there seems to be no reaction from the NATO membership. The United States has basically blackballed Spain, a critical NATO member. And what was NATO's response? Nothing. What can NATO do? I mean, look at the three loudest voices in NATO outside of the United States: France, United Kingdom, Germany. Macron is history. He's toast. He's gone. Marine Le Pen might be the next president of France. Whatever France is doing today isn't going to be done when Marine Le Pen becomes president. Look at Germany, Merz. He's not long for this world politically either. And whatever coalition emerges in the next elections will probably be inclusive of Alternative for Deutschland presence. And I can guarantee you that the trajectory they will take Germany on is far different from the trajectory that Merz is considering it right now. I say considering because let's just be frank here. Germany may have published a white paper that talks about the potential conflict with Russia in 2029. Germany will not have a military capable of this. Their military is collapsing as we speak. People tend to forget that in 2022, Olaf Scholz asked for a $100 billion infusion, one-time infusion into the German military to bring it up to snuff. That $100 billion was spent and nothing happened to the German military. It's as decrepit and dysfunctional as it is today as it was before the $100 billion. They want to talk about expanding the military from 146,000 standing army right now to one of nearly 500,000. Nobody's signing up. Nobody will volunteer. Nobody wants to defend Germany. They don't have a defense industry worthy of the name. So, Germany's out. Great Britain, Keir Starmer's out. We don't know who's going to replace him, but whoever does, it doesn't matter. Their military today could not fill a soccer stadium. There's a World Cup taking place right now, and if you put the entire British military inside one of the World Cup stadiums, you'd have 30,000 unsold seats. That's not a military power worth their name. So we're literally talking about a NATO that doesn't exist. It exists in name only. Now, there's a huge propaganda campaign being played right now. And, the world's falling for it. Yes, Ukraine is getting drones from the West, building their own. And yes, Ukraine is launching drones. And yes, those drones are impacted. How do I know? I was there. I was in St. Petersburg the morning that 96 drones were launched on the first day of the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. You know what the impact was for the population of St. Petersburg? Nothing. Zero. There was some smoke in the sky, and people went, oh, and then they got on with their lives. This isn't like the shocking thing where the people suddenly are panicking. Gilbert Doctorow can go to hell. I'm sorry, I'm just going to bring up his name in a derisive fashion every chance I can get until he has the courage to debate me live.
Who's that again? Who's that? Let's hear it.
Gilbert Doctorow. He's some sort of ostensible Russian expert. I feel bad. He's in his 80s, and one should never pick on their elders. But when you're an active participant in MI6 sponsored propaganda, you need to be called out. And that's what he is. But I was driving into Moscow the day 500 drones were launched against it. On, I think it was July 17th or June 17th. You know what the response in Moscow was? A big yawn. So what? Is there gas shortages? Absolutely. Absolutely. But they're not sustained. You can take a photograph of a gas station on one day, come back 3 days later and take a photograph of the same gas station. There's no lines. When you have drones impacting refining capacity, there will have to be adjustments made, and those adjustments aren't made instantaneously. But Russia has a plan, they have a strategy, and they're coping with it. What is the response of the Russian people? Just a hardening of their resolve to finish this war. The people who think that this drone campaign is somehow breaking the will of the Russian people, go to Russia. I just came from Russia. The will is rock solid. What I would say is this is actually backfired against Ukraine and the West, because whereas there may have been a willingness to compromise to bring this war to an end should Vladimir Putin make that decision, and he had made that decision. Understand that he made significant compromises to President Trump in Anchorage. And those compromises are over. Now there's just hardened resolve to solve this thing on the battlefield. And on the battlefield, Russia is winning across the board. People need to understand that. The one place you would expect the will of the Russian people to be wavering would be in the Donbass, which has been at war not just since 2022, but since 2014. And people would say, oh, they're exhausted. Oh, they're under drone attack. Oh, my God, they've lost electricity. They've lost water. They've lost gasoline. They want to quit. They want to give up. No, I just came from the Donbass. They want to finish this thing, and they are insisting now that it be finished on terms only acceptable to Russia. The Donbass is Russian. The people who live there are Russian, and there is no wavering there. I've never seen a more determined people in my life. I was in Zaporozhye, which is at the heart of the current drone campaign. The Ukrainians are seeking to sever the land bridge using drones that they tried to sever using a ground offensive in June of 2023. It's not succeeding. Are drones attacking? Yeah, my convoy was attacked. I had 2 drones try to kill me in Starobelsk. It's there. It's real. People are dying. Innocent civilians are dying. Soldiers are dying. This is a hard war. This is not an easy war, but it's a war that Russia's winning on a consistent basis, and they're winning today. And the other thing, too, is, these drone reports, they never follow through. For instance, Starlink. Starlink is, of course, Elon Musk's satellite, communication system that the Ukrainians have used in violation of Starlink terms of agreement, by the way, using them for military purposes. And the drones that came after me were guided by Starlink. I've spoken to the Russians about this, and it was amazing because I was expecting to hear people say, "Oh my God, this is a huge problem. We don't know what to do with it. It's a lot of problem." Every Russian I spoke to include Dmitry Rogozin, who heads the former head of Roscosmos, today is the commander of a Russian brigade, Bars Sarmat. It's a volunteer military formation that focuses on drone technology. He said, "Don't worry, Scott, we got this. We've sorted the problem out. We've got this." And as we speak right now, Starlink is being shut down sector by sector by sector in the Donbass and Zaporozhye. The Ukrainians are, switching over to other technologies. The Russians have that under control too. You'll have these flash in the pan moments where the Ukrainians are doing things. But let's keep this in mind. Gilbert Doctorow today, again, Gil, my good buddy, just published a piece of Russia's losing the war, and he cites as his example the fact that the Ukrainians launched a drone strike against Samara, 1,000 kilometers deep into Russia. And yes, they did. And yes, Samara is burning. Those fires will be put out today, and the repairs will be done in a matter of 3 days, and Samara will be back up in operation in less than a week. Is it a temporary hiccup? Absolutely. The drones that struck Samara, long-range FP-1 drones with a warhead of around 60 kilograms of high explosive. It goes pop. It goes pop. And a lot of these drones are going pop throughout Russia, and they're causing some inconvenience. Vladimir Putin himself acknowledged this in a recent statement. The Russians are responding on a daily basis with scores of ballistic missiles who have 1,000 kilogram warheads, 700 kilogram warheads, and they go boom. And when they go boom, entire facilities are destroyed. As we're sitting here glorifying in social media in the West about all the things that are going pop inside Russia, why are we ignoring the fact that the entirety of Ukraine is going boom? The destruction being leveled on Ukraine is unbelievable. And so if we're going to sit here and say Russia's losing the war because things are going pop here and there, and I'm talking about here and there, you launch 500 drones and 8 get through, this is not a victory. This is not a victory. It's unsustainable.
I agree with you, Scott.
The Russians are launching. There is no air defense left in Ukraine. No air defense left in Ukraine at all.
I just want to echo the words. I was in the Donbass area in Donetsk last year, and I recently was in a conversation with a government official. Won't say any names, but they kept referring to me to 2022. I said, "Why were you talking 2022?" Well, Alex, why are you talking about 2014, 2015 in the Donbass area? Hello. You've been down there, Scott. You saw the destruction that was, the government firing on its own people at the time. We're talking the Ukraine government firing into the eastern part of Ukraine. And I asked this government official very clearly, when the rockets and bombs went from wherever the Kiev region and they landed in Donetsk region, where were they landing? And they looked at me and said, "Well, Ukraine." I said, "Well, Ukraine army against Ukraine people, and these people don't have the rights to defend themselves." So that is of interest. I want to hear your feedback on that. And also what I'd like to really hear is someone made an interesting analogy the other day. It was Alex Christoforou from the Duran. He said that Zelensky thought that he was really taking this to Moscow, and Vladimir Putin would have to leave Moscow with all these drones. But actually, what has happened here is I think Moscow is going to be coming to Kiev very quick. I'd like to hear your input on this.
Well, Moscow is coming to Kiev. Again, let's look. I have been for some time a proponent of Russia, the need for Russia to strike Europe. I've done sound military analysis. I've identified correctly that NATO has turned itself into a secure base of logistics industrial operations for Ukraine, so that German factories can produce drones without fear of consequence, supply them to Ukraine, and Ukraine can then attack Russian targets using Western intelligence. So in effect, it's a NATO attack on Russia using Ukraine as a proxy. And I have said, and it's it conforms with international law that Russia has every right under Article 51, preemptive self-defense, to take these factories out. And I, as a military man, have been saying all along, this is what I would advocate for openly for. And I did. I mean, on June 4th, I was at St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, and I participated in a panel discussion on the future of diplomacy. And while everybody else, including the Deputy Foreign Minister of Russia, the head of INGIMO, the Russian Foreign Service Institute, and professors from this esteemed establishment talked about the necessity of diplomacy, I lost my temper, as I am wont to do. And I basically concluded that Europe is the equivalent of a rabid dog and Russia must shoot the dog. And I said that openly to great applause and to the dismay of the Russian diplomats. They appreciated my sentiment, but I was schooled the next day. And this is important because people keep accusing me of flip-flopping or change. The beauty of being a good analyst is that when you absorb new information, you bring it in, you consider it, and then you reevaluate your position based upon this new evidence. And it doesn't matter what Scott Ritter wants or what anybody wants. The only thing that matters is what the Russian leadership believes and how they will act upon this belief. Vladimir Putin gave a presentation at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum on June 6th. I had the honor and privilege of sitting in the second row of the plenary session, meaning that he's literally a short paper airplane throw away from me. So, I'm a trained observer. Spent a lot of time doing interrogations, staring Iraqis in their face and judging their physical response to different stimulus. I watched Vladimir Putin deliver this speech. I could see the sweat on his forehead. I could, see, as he moved, I watched all of his movements. This was a man in total control of himself, no panic, etc. The presentation he gave at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum came a mere 2 days after Ukraine sent 96 drones into St. Petersburg. And one would have thought that this man would be screaming for vengeance. This came less than 2 weeks, or a little more than 2 weeks after Ukraine murdered 21 students in Starobelsk, a horrific crime against humanity. And one would have thought that Vladimir Putin would have been saying, I'm going to bring vengeance. Vengeance is mine. He'd have every right to. The speech he gave did make no mention of Ukraine whatsoever. It talked about Russia's future. And at that moment in time, a light bulb went on in my head. And I said, this is a man who has decided that this Ukrainian conflict will not define the future of Russia. Now, I wasn't totally bought at that point in time because I thought that this was a little naive. I actually was a little disappointed that I was listening to his words because it's not what I was expecting to hear. But then I watched him enter the question and answer period, and Vladimir Putin came out. And what's important is that he gave a speech, and it meant that his primary objective is the economic well-being of the Russian state and of the Russian people, and that he's singularly focused on creating a stable environment for investments. And, he was able to convince enough people, and Russia was able to convince enough people during the forum that $84 billion worth of contracts were signed, investments, direct investments into Russia's future. That's pretty good salesmanship. And this was done at a time when St. Petersburg is under constant drone attack. The world isn't looking at these and said the world that deals with Russia isn't looking at these saying, oh my God, Russia's weak. They looked at Vladimir Putin and said he's strong and Russia's strong. Russia's resilient. But Putin, in the question and answer, when asked about the special military operation, asked about a letter that Zelensky had written that ridiculed Putin and talked about the long-range sanctions and the need for Putin to come to the peace table. He basically gave a Stalin-esque type order to the military, ordering them to continue the mission and onward to victory. And then he finished with a touch that maybe if you're not Russian and you don't know Russian history, recent Russian history, you wouldn't understand it. But he said, Работаем, brata. Keep working, brothers. This is a statement that was made by a Dagestani police officer when he was captured by terrorists a few years ago, and they filmed his execution. They said, do you have anything you'd like to say? He said, yes, keep working, brothers, meaning telling his guys, don't quit, keep going, no matter what. And it's become the rallying cry. When you go and speak to soldiers on the front, they all, at the end, just Работаем, brata. And the people that are working in the Donbass, in Работаем, brata. Keep working, brother. This is the rallying cry. And he looked in the camera and he said it straight to the soldiers. And people need to understand what that means. Keep working, brother. This war isn't going to end because of anything Zelensky's doing or NATO's going. It's going to end when Vladimir Putin's Russia wins this war on terms that have been dictated by Vladimir Putin. This is the ultimate reality of this. And so I have walked away, reevaluate, because then the question is, why is Vladimir Putin so confident? Why is he so confident? I mean, hell, we all see the videos. Boom, boom, boom. Refineries are going up. Vodkinsk was hit. You know this. I took personal offense at that because I worked at Vodkinsk. I understand how important that defense industrial factory is to Russia's ballistic missiles. And I said, how can Russia allow this offense to take place? And the answer is because Russia's winning this war. And this is what people need to understand. All this other stuff, all this drone is a distraction. Ukraine is not defeating Russia through these drone attacks. Ukraine is creating a nuisance for Russia. The Russian response, however, is destroying Ukraine. Ukraine is attacking gas stations in the. I was there in Zaporizhia. I have to tell you, almost every gas station was closed because closed and sandbagged up over the reservoirs to keep the drones from hitting them, catching on fire. Gas was being rationed. Was there any panic? Absolutely no panic whatsoever. Hotels had no electricity. They had generators going, and they had to work to get the fuel for the generators. They had no running water because the electricity's out. Was there panic? No panic whatsoever. These people are just rolling up their sleeves. Robote and brata. Keep working, brother. Keep going. The love they have for the soldier is manifest on a daily basis because they understand the sacrifice that Russian soldiers are making for them. They also understand that Russia is winning. They understand what's going on. We see one side of the drone war. We see what the West wants us to see about the drone attacks against Russia. But what they don't show is what Russia is doing to Ukraine. Russia's winning the drone warfare. I interviewed Russian drone fighters. I went to their units. I watched them train. I went to their research facilities. I spoke to their leadership. And they described the reality of drone warfare in graphic detail. It's an ugly war, guys. I'm not here to say that this isn't, this is a cakewalk for the Russians. The Russians won't say it's a cakewalk. They'll say we can't move right now in a certain direction because the Ukrainians are flooding the zone with drones. And it's very dangerous to move. They wouldn't let me go to places we had agreed that I could go to because they said, well, you'll die. That was it. You'll die. And if I'm going to die, that means Russian soldiers are dying. So I'm not pretending that this is a cakewalk. But what happens to the Russians, they don't panic. They sit there, they evaluate the situation. They have specialty units to come in, take over the drone fight, kill all the Ukrainian drone operators, and push the Ukrainians back, and then the Russian army keeps advancing. It's a slow, deadly fight. The gray zone that separates the two lines is oftentimes 10, 20, 30, up to 50 kilometers deep, which means in order to close with and destroy the Ukrainian enemy through firepower maneuver, you have to go through a dead man zone you're being attacked by drones the whole time. So when people say, well, the Russians are only advancing a kilometer. No, they advanced 61 kilometers. They advanced 60 kilometers through the gray zone, fought their way through the gray zone, engaged the Ukrainians, and pushed them back a kilometer. Now, the Ukrainians will then pull further back to create a gray zone, bring in a drone wall, and the Russians will rinse and repeat. This war is going 100% the way the Russians want it to go. Drone warfare is the key here. It takes 4 weeks minimum to train a basic drone operator. It takes an additional 6 months for that drone operator to get the skill set necessary to be functional on this battlefield because drone warfare is extraordinarily complicated, extraordinarily technical in nature. I learned a whole bunch on this trip, and I'll hope to be writing an article and making a documentary film about it. But the thing is, the Ukrainians every day are losing 5, 6, 7 drone command posts. That means that each command post has anywhere between 8 and 15 seasoned drone operators. I just said they're losing 5, 6, 7, of these. 7 times 15. You're talking about 100 experienced drone operators dying a day, Ukrainian side. 100 experienced drone operators dying a day. They can't be replaced. So, what the Ukrainians have done is surge capacity in the month of May and June, got tremendous, psychological warfare benefit from this through the hype of Western media. But right now, in the middle of July, they're all dead. They're all dead. They're all dying. The victories they're claiming are short-term victories. Meanwhile, Russia is slaughtering them at the front line, advancing on the front line, and devastating their industrial depth. Russia is now expanding its target deck to go beyond purely military targets. Look, Donald Trump, did anybody listen to the stupidity he said to Zelensky? I mean, he gave away the farm. He said, Ukraine's got a lot of drones. They're making them in basements. Really, Donnie? So you're acknowledging that Ukrainians are violating the law of war. You're acknowledging that Ukraine has turned all of civil society into a fact. It's something we know. We know because Ukrainian housewives go on social media and go, I've got a great side gig. I'm making a drone right here. I make drone parts. And then they take it down to my basement and we assemble them and get. So you're admitting your entire apartment complex is a legitimate target of war. Now, Russia's avoided striking these because, perception creates its own reality. But there are dual purpose facilities. For instance, a furniture factory in Kiev was destroyed 2 days ago. I mean, destroyed like it's never been destroyed before. And everyone goes, oh, look at the Russians striking a drone factory. Well, they didn't look at the photographs because the the furniture factory was producing drones. And the drone parts were laying out there for everybody to see. This is the reality. The Russians are expanding their target deck. They're devastating the defense industrial capacity. All the stuff that they talked about in NATO, much of that no longer exists because it's been destroyed. And if you wait a month, it'll all be destroyed. This is the harsh truth that Kiev is on fire. Moscow is not on fire. Having one drone come in, it hit an oil tank and flip a lid up, and everybody goes, "Ooh, Russia's getting their ass kicked." No, Russia's not getting its ass kicked. Ukraine, on the other hand, is being slaughtered, butchered. And look at the panic in Zelensky's statement. Remember, he just came from Ankara. He's now out there saying, I really need to hold you guys to account here. You made a lot of promises. You need to deliver on these promises. You need to give me those air defense missiles, because he's realizing he's going to get nothing. Nothing. It was all smoke and mirrors. What happened in Ankara was all smoke and mirrors. He's going to get absolutely nothing from this. And anything he does get is going to be destroyed before it gets to the battlefield. If it makes it to the battlefield, it'll be the hands of dead people. So that's where I'm at.
Cyrus, I'm going to let you jump in a sec, but I'm just going to get these two questions off my chest here, because Scott, love hearing you talk. Everybody loves hearing you talk, and they're probably saying, Alex, get on with your questions. We want Scott back on here. So, two questions. One is, what happens when Russia takes territory back from Ukraine? I mean, immediately what will happen is Ukraine won't be responsible for the electric grid. They won't be responsible for the water. They won't be responsible for cellular. So does that entire city go dark and wait for Russia to connect all these things back up? And the second question I have is, when I'm starting to see these news reports from Kiev after a bombing, I'm seeing multi-million dollars of brand new fire trucks, majorly expensive uh rescue equipment. And we're talking, if you go back 4 or 5 years, you see a lot of broken down infrastructure. But how is the economy managing to stay afloat? Is that, we'll call it, Zelensky money pumping that economy and keeping it on life support? I know it's a big question, but I just can't. When I envision Ukraine, I would envision it smashed, emergency vehicles all bent and broken down. But these are multi-million-dollar fire trucks, emergency equipment. You see, it's some of the most beautiful equipment you've ever seen, and driving down a well-maintained street. Uh, I have to tell you, I didn't see that in the Donetsk area. I saw hardworking people getting on with their lives, repairing broken windows, digging out from, some of these, civilians that were clearly attacked, even, in the earlier days of 2019, 2020, even before this was making the headlines. So again, how is it that Ukraine can manage to keep its economy going? And what happens when they lose their territory? How does Russia take that over?
Well, we need to be careful about keeping their economy going. When you look at the emergency vehicles, understand that there's a huge, in the West, they call it humanitarian support program. You know, a lot of the vehicles you see are, for instance, from the British Fire Service or from European fire services. They're donated in kind. Um, and they're relatively new, modern. The equipment they're wearing is relatively new and modern, and they have the emergency services up and running because that's part of the propaganda exercise. First of all, Ukraine positions itself as a European nation, so its emergency services have to look like a European emergency response. So they have firefighters, and I'm a former firefighter myself. I will never denigrate the courage of and dedication of those who respond to emergencies of this nature. I'm not going to criticize the Ukrainian firefighters. I'm happy they have the most modern equipment possible, and I'm glad they have the training, the skill set necessary to mitigate, the harm being done to their community. That's their job, and they're doing their job. But this is not part of, effective planning on the part of Zelensky. This is part of the entire, again, propaganda effort to create impression. Perceptions create their own reality. And so when people take a look at Ukrainian emergency response and they see, fire trucks that look like their fire trucks, and they see firefighters that look like their firefighters. Because damn well, you look at the Donetsk, you go to Moscow even, those firefighters don't look like us. They look like Russians. And some of the, and you're like, oh, that's different. But now when you look at Ukraine, you're literally seeing a mirror image of European firefighting, European emergency response. So this is all done by design. This is part of the propaganda. Again, I'm not, I'm, as a firefighter, I have a little nice spot in my heart to those who rush into fires, even if they're Ukrainians. It takes a special kind of person, and I'm glad they have good fire equipment. I really am. I'm glad they're able to do the job. Sadly for them, that's going to be a job that's going to become increasingly more difficult to perform because you're going to see that Ukraine is going to lose water pressure. They're going to lose electricity. They're going to lose, and the infrastructure is going to start to crumble right now. But Kiev is one giant propaganda exercise. One giant propaganda exercise. The Russians have commented about this. Because somebody said the other day after one of these attacks, it disrupted there used to be parties and nightlife, and now because of the Russian attack, there's no parties tonight. I don't know. Maybe there shouldn't be parties. You're a nation at war. But Ukraine has maintained this whole concept of, we're like you. The propaganda exercise is so that anybody who looks at Ukraine is seeing a mirror image of themselves, seeing a modern society functioning as a modern society. And it's done by design for this purpose. And so that's what's going on with the emergency services. It's not part of the Ukrainian budget per se. It's part of the Western propaganda exercise to create this notion that Ukraine is a mirror image of Europe. And again, from the perspective of firefighting, I'm glad. It's not the fault of a Ukrainian family that a Ukrainian Patriot missile hits their apartment complex, because it's not a Russian missile hitting their apartment complex. It's an Ukrainian air defense missile. And these people become trapped in a burning building. Thank God there's firefighters that will go in there and affect the rescue. And when they do affect the rescue, I want that rescue affected quickly, safely for all parties involved. I want that family rescued, and I want their property, I want damage is mitigated as much as possible. I'm not out for bloodlust revenge against the average Ukrainian civilian. They're innocent victims in this conflict that's been thrust upon them by their government and by the collective West. Now, what happens to places that the Russians captured? I just was at Mariupol, and Mariupol was, of course, devastated in the fighting that took place in 2022, in the spring and summer of 2022. Headquarters of the Azov battalion, which is really more like a brigade-sized element, that fought, they held on to the end, but it was an occupied city, occupied by literal Nazis who, gave a Nazi response, meaning they fought to the death until they surrendered. But the point is, Mariupol today is, it hasn't been totally rebuilt because I just drove through it. I can attest that the areas around Azovstal, the big factory, and the Lenin factory, are devastated by this fighting, and they haven't been rebuilt, and many of them are going to have to be leveled because they can't be rebuilt. They've been damaged beyond the potential of repair. But as you approach Mariupol from Donetsk, you see, Donetsk is, you'll see Azovstal, but if you get to the south of Mariupol, you'll see new new construction, totally new districts. These new construction is done, by the Russian government. The Russians have gone out and they've divided the sectors up and handed over to different cities and different regions. So, for instance, St. Petersburg will take over responsibility for one sector. Novosibirsk will have responsibility for another, and you can just go on and on and on. I went to the theater, and you might remember that the theater, National Theater in Mariupol, was blown up, and the Ukrainians tried to say the Russians did it, but the evidence is clear that Azov blew it up. The forensics is quite evident. But it's been totally rebuilt, and I mean totally rebuilt, magnificent. And it's working today. It shows how cultured the Russians are. I think the Master Margarita was being performed during the week that I was there. But it was rebuilt by St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg, the city, adopted this project and rebuilt the thing. And you go through Mariupol. I ate at cafes. I ate at restaurants there. Electricity's there. They're plugged into the Russian grid, and the society is living as a Russian city. That's the way it is. The closer you get to the front, of course, it's very difficult to bring that kind of connectivity because places are being shelled. I was in Gorlovka, which is used to be literally a frontline city. It's still a city that's being attacked continuously, but it's being built. They're doing construction projects every day to fix the damage and to make it a fully functional city. I spoke to the mayor, and he is very proud of what they've been doing. But places like Bakhmut right now, it's very difficult to rebuild Bakhmut because it's still under continuous fire from the Ukrainians, drone strikes. It's hard to bring a construction crew in and begin the kind of normal renovations and rehabilitation of buildings while you're being subjected to drone attack on a 24/7 basis. Drone warfare is real. But I will say this: I went to a refugee camp, and when I say refugee, these are Russians who live in the frontline villages. Who, as the Russian army advances, they liberate these people. The Ukrainians called them zhdun, meaning the people who wait, the stay behind people. And the Ukrainian army hates them. They try to forcefully evacuate them because they don't want to create the impression that anybody in the Donbass wants to be Russian. But these people want to be Russian. And they wait for the Russian soldiers. They refuse to be evacuated. So the Ukrainians trap them in their basements and use them as human shields. Some of these people were held in their basements for 30, 60, some 90 days. No food, no water, starving. If they went out to get food, the Ukrainians shelled them, killed them. If they went out to bury the bodies of their loved ones, they got shelled and killed again. As the Russian army approached, though, the Russian army would make contact with these people. Remember, the Russian army is under fire, under drone attack. And they would identify that these people are there. The Russians don't go rushing in and just blow everything up. They ensure that there's no civilians there before they take out a building. And they often find that there are civilians in the basement. So the Russian soldiers come in and they bring food, they bring water, they bring medicine. They take care of these people. They stabilize the situation. And one by one, these people, all of whom were elderly, I mean, talking 60s, 70s, some in their 80s, they literally teared up as they described what happened next because once they got their strength back, once they got their health restored somewhat, the Russians would then evacuate them. And they talked about how they would come out and the Russian soldiers would literally cover their bodies with their own bodies, absorbing the shrapnel from the drone strikes, the artillery strikes. The Russian soldiers were literally sacrificing their lives for these people. One lady talked about how she had 5 soldiers surround her. 2 of them died. The other 3 were wounded to save her. 5 Russian soldiers became casualties to save her. And the Russian soldiers never blinked at all. This was their duty. This was their job, their responsibility. And, this is the reality. These are Russian people. They want to be part of Russia. And the Russian army is treating them with the respect they deserve as Russian citizens. And they're bringing them out and then they're taking care of them until they can go home. Eventually this war will end. And when the war ends, Russia will bring connectivity to these towns, these villages will be linked to the Russian grid. They will be part of Russia. They will have Russian gas, Russian services, Russian roads, Russian education, Russian healthcare, everything. The pensions will be Russian. This is the reality, but there is a war going on right now. So there's a number of places that are destroyed, devastated by this. Is the Ukrainians dig into towns. Just take a look at Chasiv Yar. It is physically destroyed from top to bottom because the Ukrainians made the decision to turn every building into a fortified position. So Russia had to go in, clear the buildings to make sure there were no civilians there, and then kill the Ukrainians inside. And in the process, their horrific devastation has taken place. But I promise you this: when this war is over, Chasiv Yar will be rebuilt, just like Mariupol has been rebuilt. Mariupol stands as a symbol of what the future of the Donbass, of Zaporozhye, of Kherson is. Every Russian town, every Russian village, every Russian city that is part of this these territories will be restored because this is what Russia does. For the last 26 years, Vladimir Putin has overseen national restoration of Russia. There's not a city you can go to that has declined over the course of the past 26 years. Every city has shown growth, tremendous growth in some cases. And this will be the future of the new territories of the Donbass, of tremendous growth once this war ends. And this war will end, and it will end in a total Russian victory.
Yeah, Scott, thank you so much for the insights and obviously sharing your insights from your recent visits to Russia. It's always fascinating to hear you traveling around the country, talking to people. And again, I mean, you're one of the few Americans that have the opportunity to do that and certainly have the experience. I know you've been traveling to Russia for many, many years and, can give us those. I'd like to kind of switch to Iran. I'd like to get kind of your thoughts on this Iran war. I know that this live stream is predominantly about this. We got a lot of people in the chat. Curious to get your thoughts on where we're going with this, because we're seeing Iran has now launched a aggressive attack on many of the Gulf states. I think that this is really. I think it's really the start of the war. I mean, this MOU is just nothing but, buying time to, basically start to fill up the oil reserves for a little bit. I was doing an interview with another very prominent voice who said, look, we're basically gearing up for a very large escalation that's going to happen. We're potentially looking at Trump's going to go after Karg Island. They're going to use many different proxies to try to, they're not going to want to risk U.S. lives, but they're going to try to start a war and use proxies to basically get entangled to try to weaken the Iranian leadership. So I'd like to get your expert analysis on that war, because we have so many darn wars and conflicts going around the world. What are your thoughts on Iran as we're looking now in middle of July?
I just want to remind people that the United States fought an unsuccessful 39-day war against Iran. People tend to forget that, and we lost. We came out with Iran with everything we had other than nuclear weapons. B-2 bombers, massive ordnance penetrating bombs, cruise missiles, other missiles, standoff missiles, long-range strike missiles, F-35 aircraft, F-15 aircraft, A-10 aircraft. You name the aircraft, we had the aircraft. And we lost. Just want to put that marker down because we didn't just lose, we depleted our strength. We don't have stockpiles of air defense systems capable of repeating that exercise. We don't have stockpiles of long-range strike weapons capable of repeating that exercise. So when people keep saying, well, we're getting ready to see another full-scale war, no, we're not, because the United States is incapable of fighting that kind of war. We can't do it again. We can do short bursts, which is what we're doing right now. And then the other thing that we can't sustain over time is, another oil crisis. The Strait of Hormuz is effectively shut right now. Iran has mined the southern approach that the United States was advocating, the Omani coastal, transit pathway. That's gone. It doesn't happen. Doesn't exist. The only way you get through the Strait of Hormuz is going through Iranian-controlled passages, and you have to pay a premium to do that. And if you don't, then you get sunk. Or you get hit. And the United States can't change that calculus. I don't know how many times we have to listen to Donald Trump threaten to take Karg Island. Apparently, Donald Trump doesn't know anything about how to do amphibious assaults and what the consequences would be. How are we going to take Karg Island? I mean, I'm curious, because the two Marine Amphibious Ready groups are on the other side of the Strait of Hormuz. They got to go through the Strait of Hormuz to get to Karg Island, and they're not going to get through the Strait of Hormuz. So how do you get the Marines there? Well, you use helicopters. Okay, I want to remind people that the last time we did a large-scale helicopter assault on a defended island was Koh Tang Island in May of 1975. Didn't go well. 8 of the 11 helicopters approaching were shot or damaged. I think 3 of them were shot down, a number of Marines killed. And we ended up having to, evacuate under fire. We left 3 Marines behind who were captured and executed. We don't leave Marines behind, but that's what we did there because we lost that battle. We will lose the Battle of Carg Island, not because Marines can't fight, but because some battles just can't be won. That's the reality of it. So, what's he talking about taking Carg Island? We're not going to take Carg Island. If we land paratroopers on it, they'll all die. If we land Marines on it, they'll have to be evacuated. So it's a fantasy world that he lives in. He talks about things that just aren't going to happen. But the big thing that's not going to happen is that, he can't afford to have the global economy shut down right now. Saudi Arabia rediverted 70% of its oil production away from Strait of Hormuz, routing through Yanbu. And that means that now it has to exit using the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. The Houthi can shut that down at will. And right now the Houthi are sort of in a, that's in Yemen, are in a shooting match with Saudi Arabia and its proxies. And it may very well go that they will shut down the Bab el-Mandeb. Dmitry Medvedev called it Iran's thermonuclear weapon. The nuclear weapon, of course, is the Strait of Hormuz, which is now effectively shut down. So, whatever, J.D. Vance said, the MOU is just fake. Well, thank you, J.D., for that burst of honesty. You now confirmed everything the Iranians said about you in the United States. We're in agreement incapable. It was just designed to buy time for the United States to get oil supplies up. Okay, we got the oil supplies up. And now what? We're engaged in a struggle now that's just reversed everything we gained, and it's only going to get worse. The United States does not have a military solution to this problem. Iran does have a military solution to this problem, but Iran also has an economic solution to this problem. And, this is the fact. So I don't see us heading towards a major war simply because the United States can't afford to do it. What I see is the United States being agreement incapable. And I also see that Iran understands this, and Iran doesn't want, to have war without end also. Remember, during the same time that the United States upped its oil supplies, I think Iran sold 60 million barrels of oil. That's a lot of oil. That's a lot of income. They'd like to keep doing that. They want connectivity with the East, not to be, cut off. And so what I think you're going to see is just this permanent state of hybrid warfare, backed by what I call hybrid diplomacy, fake diplomacy. Both Iran and the United States understand there will not be a diplomatic solution, but they will both continue to talk about an MOU and talk about terms that'll be implemented partially at the convenience of both parties. And then when they reach a wall, they'll devolve back into tit for tat conflict that'll burst out, and then they'll resolve it and will continue. And just enough oil will flow through the Strait of Hormuz to keep the global economy from collapsing. This is, I think, the intent of the United States. Now, Iran could force the issue by simply shutting down not just the Strait of Hormuz, but shutting down Bab el-Mandeb, and then pound the living dog poop out of the Gulf Arab nations that are supporting the United States, which appears to be what's going on right now. They still have the safety valve of Bab el-Mandeb, but if they shut that down, the United States has no recourse. We will have to make certain concessions. There is no long-term sustainable path towards victory for the United States against Iran. We don't dominate any aspect of this fight. The Iranians do. We can create short-term disruptions, but again, we've already proven for 39 days we hit Iran with everything we had, and we didn't win the war. They won. They win by surviving. They win by holding on to their strategic objectives, by redefining the conflict. This conflict started out as a regime change conflict. It ended as a energy security conflict. And Iran is the one that successfully transitioned into that mode. And we don't have an energy security solution. We can't force the strait. We can't. Taking Carg Island doesn't solve anything, by the way. It's just a stupid movement, a concept that make it look like the United States can do something. We can do nothing. And the Gulf Arab states that are supporting us are paying a heavy price right now, being hammered. And I think the Iranians are prepared to continue hammering them. And at some point in time, their resolve will break because they'll recognize that the United States doesn't have a plan for victory. There is no path for victory. And the only way that these nations who are energy producing nations, the only way they can survive in a sustainable fashion is to keep their economy functioning. Their economy can only function through the continued sale of energy, oil, gas, and that only happens if the straits are open, and the straits are closed right now. So they're starving, economically starving. And the rest of the world is going to starve too. The United States was paying a huge diplomatic price prior to the termination of 39-day campaign. The world barely recovered. In some cases, I saw a graphic. I didn't have a chance to fully assess it, but I saw a lot of red arrows going down. So I assume that means a lot of bad things are happening in energy supply and the economy, and that's the reality of it. And this will also be bad for the United States for Donald Trump at the midterm election. So the path the United States has taken is an unsustainable path. Iran can sustain it a lot longer than we can, but neither side wants to have a permanent state of a full-scale war. The question is, how do you get the United States to agree to concessions that are reflective of reality? The United States continues to want to. Donald Trump wants to, gain at the negotiating table that which he failed to gain on the battlefield, and Iran's just not going to sacrifice the advantages they have. What would happen to Iran if they gave up the Strait of Hormuz? They lose all leverage. They're not going to give up the Strait of Hormuz. What would happen to Iran if they gave up their ballistic missile program? They'd be dead. They're not going to give that up. Their nuclear program, they're just not going to concede on issues of sovereignty. The United States could easily have come up with a nuclear solution, but it would have been one that reflected reality, not the fantasy that Israel's trying to impose of zero enrichment, zero, etc. But right now, I just see us going through this seesaw of conflict, escalation, de-escalation, escalation, de-escalation, escalation, de-escalation. I don't see us lurching towards a resumption of full-scale war simply because the United States is not in a position to wage that kind of war anymore. We don't have the ammunition to do it.
Sorry, I was mute. I was muted there. Yeah, I don't think there's a military solution for the United States. It's basically going to come down to a question: is how badly do we want to lose this war? Right? How badly? When do we cut our losses and essentially get out? I mean, I think it is actually remarkable when you look at.
That's a political question,
Sorry,
not a military. That's a political question, and I don't think that question can be accurately answered until after the midterms. And so, because Donald Trump's not going to take the political risk of being seen as a weak leader prior to the midterms. So that's why I think we're going to see this kind of escalation. After the midterms, I think reality is going to bite hard. Donald Trump will have to make certain concessions that are reflective of reality.
Yeah, I think so. Well, Scott, I want to say, thank you so much for, your amazing insights into Russia, Iran. I mean, I think all of us are certainly coming to those conclusions about Iran, but also just worried about the global economy. I do think that this MOU was essentially a desperate move from Donald Trump to basically pump up those oil reserves, as he admitted himself. Donald Trump is one that is certainly going to let you know. He does not have a filter. He's going to let you know exactly what he's feeling. And he said, "Look, if I didn't sign this MOU, we would have had a global catastrophe. We had to sign this." So it's Donald Trump does not a bluff. He just says it as it is. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it's a very bad thing for him. But it definitely gives us an insight that is very true. So yeah, it's a good point though. I like that I like what you said there. That is definitely a political question as opposed to a military one. This is going to be the tit for tat, back and forth. It's going to be some instability, but Donald Trump's got to try to keep that facade up until at least the midterms. And then after that, who knows what's going to happen? It's going to be a wild ride. I'll bring back Alex. And Alex, any final questions that you have, my friend? Scott, you've been so generous with your time today, and I know our guests and our viewers are always such a big fan of seeing you on here.
Everybody, scottritter.com, 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 scottritter.com. Please, please, please check that out. Is that where we find you, Scott?
It is. ScottRitter.com will take you to my Substack page. I actually am revamping it a little bit to keep it up to speed. And I just would point out, first of all, I thank you very much for the kind words you said about the value added from my visits to Russia. I also had the honor and privilege of attending a pre-NATO conference in Istanbul, Turkey, and such. And there's opportunities coming up that could take me to China, could take me to Iran, who knows? But none of it happens without support. And I am an independent journalist, and I get my salary from my Substack subscription. So thank you for all of those who do a paid subscription. It's a free subscription if you can't afford it, and I don't compel anybody to do it. So if you want the information, it's there. If you want to help put the roof over my house, subscription. If you want me to travel, that's done purely by donations. Again, people have accused me of being on the payroll of several nations. I'm on the payroll of you, the viewer. You're the ones that make this possible. If the donations come in, I can continue my work. If they don't, I can't, and that's just the way the life works. But I'm not beholden to anybody but you. And if you donate, that means that you appreciate what I'm doing as an independent journalist, and I'm deeply grateful for that. And if you do a paid subscription, I'm deeply grateful for that as well, because that gives me the freedom of mind to be able to write and publish and make documentaries. I have two documentaries that are in the process of being finalized. One I call The Chechen Miracle, which focuses on Chechnya and the relationship it has with Russia. It's a unique relationship. The relationship it has with Islam and Christianity, again, unique. And the second one is The Gray Zone. It's about about drone warfare, again, derived from my most recent trip, a trip that was made possible by your donations. And so there's product coming out from this that I think is valuable, adds to the overall discussion. But I'm deeply grateful for you, Alex, and for you, Cyrus, for allowing me to come on and talk with you and to talk with your audience. And I'm deeply grateful for the support that your audience has provided over the years.
Again, Scott, after the
Yeah,
show,
absolutely.
I will be heading over there to make a donation as I do. Thank you again. It's a great pleasure to have you on the program. I know you got a busy schedule today. I bet you do. What's the next show you're going to end up on, Scott?
Well, today actually it's about after this show it's going to be home work. I've been gone a long time, and I have obligations on the domestic front, and so we're going to be going out and taking care of these domestic obligations that have built up over time. But I think tomorrow I start bright and early with just the normal round. I have my schedule here. Let's see.
Put us on there in the next couple weeks so I don't have to email you so much, buddy.
Well, I'm going to I'm taking one more trip on the 16th. I'll be gone till the 24th. But when I get back, we can definitely do something.
Awesome stuff. Awesome stuff.
That sounds
Okay,
great, Scott.
Scott, we got your links in our description. Everybody head over to scottritter.com. This guy is solid. And again, Scott, have yourself a great day. And we'll stay on the show here with Cyrus. We've got some other topics to cover. But thanks again, Scott. We really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Thank you, Scott. We'll see you soon.